This is What Next, the Adoptee Rights Podcast. I'm Gregory Luce, the Executive Director of Adoptees United and an adoptee rights lawyer. I'm also an adopted person, born and adopted in the District of Columbia. In each episode of What Next, I talk about what's on our minds, whether it's the state of adopted people and adoptee rights around the world, legislative issues, interviews, or the frequent absurdities and complications of being an adopted person. This is finally the start of the second season of the podcast, after being away for more than a year. It's not that I don't love it. I do, a lot. But for anyone who's ever been knee-deep in the world of law and advocacy like I am, sometimes your capacity outstrips what you need to get done. I'm so happy to start off the second season with someone I consider very dear to me, Astrid Castro, who is a transnational adoptee, born in Colombia, and also the longtime leader of Oregon-based Adoption Mosaic. For reasons you'll see, I'm going to let her introduce herself. Finally, because we had such a good time talking, we're breaking this episode into two parts, one about Astrid and the second part about Adoption Mosaic, both of them released together. Although Astrid and Adoption Mosaic are deeply intertwined, I wanted to make sure people had the ability and time to listen to each one, rather than thinking they did not have the time to listen to the entire episode at once. Thanks. Well, I'm so excited to have you here. You've been an inspiration to me since I started doing this work, and I learned of what you're doing. So it's great to finally have you. And we'll talk about how you're actually, what I mean by inspiring, you also sometimes kick my butt by asking me questions that, about, I don't mean to be violent like that, but that things that we should be doing. And I get back on those things, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the first thing is I would love for you to introduce yourself in the way I've heard you, and you probably don't know what that is, but in the past, and assuming it's to an audience of adoptees and you feel fairly safe in the space. So if someone said to you, okay, Astrid, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and your history.
Yeah, hello, my name's Astrid Castro. I am the CEO and founder of Adoption Mosaic. And prior to doing this work, what led me to this work is my own experience, lived experience of being an adoptee, a transracial adoptee. I was adopted with my full biological sister when I was 4.5. My sister was 6. And we came to the United States. We immigrated to the United States, which is kind of a newish concept for me to be using that language, which I'm still not sure if that's even the right language. However, we did immigrate to the United States through adoption, and our parents here in the United States were not able to have children biologically, and they decided to go the adoption route to grow their family. They were a loving white couple who were well-meaning and were, I believe, a product of a broken system, and they adopted us with every well-intention and goodness in their heart to raise us and be full members of our family. And little did they know that they were adopting children that were traumatized, had experienced a world that was unfathomable to their existence, only things they saw on TV. And so for them to have the tools to raise us in the way that we needed to be raised, with the understanding that adoption is trauma, that we were older, we spoke Spanish, we only spoke Spanish. They didn't speak a word of Spanish. They only spoke English. My dad growing up had a story of saying a joke about there was a moment within probably the first week of us coming that we really understood that they didn't understand a word that we were saying. And
right.
So
you were old enough that you were speaking Spanish.
Oh yeah, I was 4.5.
Yeah.
Everybody knows a 4.5-year-old, right?
Yeah,
They got lots to say. And surprise, surprise, I even had more to say than most 4.5-year-olds. I was I was a talker. I had lots to say. And so my dad says this story about, and he kind of my dad uses humor a lot. And And so he said, I remember that day that you girls realized that we didn't understand a thing that we were saying. And we were running around with a dictionary asking you, we knew how to say, please repeat that. What? They knew how to say that. And they had a dictionary that they would use and they would try to understand what we were saying. And sometimes we would apparently, I don't remember this, but we would tease him because we would say something, run into the another room, and then just wait till he came around. And he said, "I want it," because I was always saying yes. Yeah, it was clear you were asking me a question, so I would say yes. And I had to follow you to make sure I hadn't said it was okay for you to set fire to the dog, and so so my dad uses that joke, and I grew up hearing that my entire life.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until I started doing this work that I realized how much trauma was in that story, how
Yeah.
much sadness was in, like, so sure, maybe we caught on. And my personality is one where I could see myself doing something like that for sure.
Hmm.
And the trauma behind, you don't even know what you're saying yes to your children about. And
Hmm.
here they were in survivor mode, trying to figure out a new culture, new parents, new foods, new smells, everything about our existence. And he didn't even know what he was saying yes to.
Right. And then was it in some ways like you were in your own little world too with your sister because you could communicate back and forth all the time?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we were told that the two of us held on to our Spanish longer than we would have if we had been adopted individually, of course. So
Right.
we lost our Spanish completely within 6 months of arriving, but it would have probably been shorter. Uh, yeah. So I came into this work because it was clear that nobody was having these conversations. I was
Hmm.
18 years old and I knew it that people ask me all the time, like, how did you like grow your consciousness? How did you come into your consciousness?
Hmm.
And I can honestly say, I believe from the minute adoption happened for us, I was asking questions
Right.
in my mind. And I was asking probably 4 year olds, 10-year old, 15-year old ethical questions around adoption.
Right.
Like, a second, there's something that doesn't make sense in this storyline.
Right.
I also really struggled as an adolescent, and I was not uh, a good fit, if you will, with the type of parenting styles my parents were using with my other siblings. And so I pushed a lot of buttons, and I pushed a lot of my parents' buttons in a different kind of way than my siblings did. My siblings, in the way that they were children, was manageable for my parents.
Hmm.
They knew how to parent those type of children, but a type of type of child that I had this had a lot of energy. I was never diagnosed with ADHD, but maybe that.
Hmm.
I was dyslexic,
Hmm.
severely dyslexic, and was pulled out of regular school by the
I did
time I
not know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know how to read until I was 14, pulled out of regular school. We moved around a lot, which is why I was never tested. And every time we would get my mom, she was a really wonderful advocate for me at the school level she would try to get me tested. She would, say I never got in trouble for my grades, for example. School, my mom could see my school was really hard for me. She was always helping me with my school.
Hmm.
I managed. I got by with. I have a lot of really funny stories of the toxic. And once again, the funny stories, when you really think about them, they're filled with trauma. They're filled with survivor. I was like trying to get the world around me, a very reading very literate world,
Hmm.
trying to convince them that I was too literate, and I was not.
So
Uh,
do you laugh or cry at these stories now, or both? Or are they
Neither,
just neither? They're just
neither.
stories.
They're just part of who I am. And
Yeah.
I think of them, I don't think I laugh or cry. I think I'm in awe.
In what way?
I'm like,
That
wow,
you made it through?
you were really resilient. You were
Hmm.
really clever. You thought of things like, for example, Greg, I would, back in the olden days, you'll remember this,
Hmm.
we could pick up our phone
Yep.
and call zero and get an operator.
Right.
And that operator could help answer questions around how to call this or how to do right,
Hmm.
how to find something. And I had a phone in my room, and I would call zero and ask the person on the other line. I would say, my mom and dad are not home, and I can't do my homework, and I'm wondering if you could help me. And the operator was always so happy to help me. And
The
they
operator, that's wild.
it was almost always a woman. Well, no, I
Uh-huh.
think it was always a woman.
Yeah.
And she, oh, honey, of course I will. And I just got so much love. And my parents were downstairs and had no idea.
Well,
Um,
is it okay if I laugh at that? I mean,
yeah, well, of course, that's what I mean. Like it's an incredible this resilience or this finding my resources from a really young age, and just like when I see kids struggling and doing things like things that in society are not appropriate because it's cheating or it's doing the or whatever, I've always felt like that's their way of navigating a world that was not structured for them,
right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Um, so going back to the whole purpose of when I asked you that question about how you introduce yourself, and you actually alluded to the thing that I found so fascinating when I heard you introduce yourself, and maybe been a month ago in a group that we're both in, that you use the term "I immigrated to the U.S." as an adoptee. And I represent many intercountry transnational adoptees, and sometimes when I tell them that they're considered an immigrant to the US, they are a little bit taken aback, or they've never really considered that, or they sometimes reject it. And so I'm wondering how that process came for you, and it sounds like you're still dealing with it, to introduce yourself and sort of own the term "I immigrated to the US." How has that process gone for you to start to include that in your introduction and even talk about the thoughts of whether it works for you or not?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the story of when I was introduced. It was pre-reunion. So the term immigrant and myself identifying as an immigrant was not even on my radar, even the slightest, until I was being interviewed for a local newspaper here. And the man who was interviewing me, it was called the Asian Reporter. And the man who was introduced, or excuse me, who was interviewing me, was a, I believe, Chinese immigrant. And he asked me to remind him when I immigrated to this country. And I laughed and I said, oh, no, 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 no. I didn't immigrate to this country. I was adopted.
Right. Yeah.
And like the minute that you've that experience of the words are coming out of your mouth and you're reaching with your hands to try to grab them and pull them back into your mouth and say, whoa, 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 that what did I just say? That was what was happening. And I was like, I'm sitting here in front of a person who identifies me, who is an immigrant, who is identifying me as an immigrant. And kind of there was so many thoughts and ideas that were going on in my mind. And one was, out of respect that he is an immigrant and he's identifying me, then that gives me that this permission
Hmm.
to identify. One, two, I had never been identified as an immigrant. My parents had never identified me as they would just say they're my daughters. They barely would even say that they're Colombianas, or they would, you know, not identify that we were born in a different country,
Right.
very rarely. And I think that that was the the way education was taught around adoption. Treat them as if you gave birth to them, and everything will be hunky dory and just fine.
Right.
And so this narrative that we were born in another country doesn't fit the act as if you gave birth to them narrative,
Hmm.
right? So my initial thought was, whoa, I think I'm going to have to think about this, but okay, I guess I am. And then I went home and I just thought and thought about it, like, am I? And I started kind of identifying as such because it did make sense. There were parts of my identity and parts of the way I moved in the world and the way I was treated oftentimes was parallel to the traditional immigrant story that I was accustomed to hearing.
Hmm.
And yet it wasn't, because then I started meeting more and more people who were of more of the traditional. Their families came here. They were either born in another country but raised here, but with their family intact, their immediate family intact, and feeling like that wasn't necessarily my experience, but that because I had been given permission by a Chinese immigrant himself,
Right.
I felt like I could talk about that or identify with that term. Then, Greg, I found my birth mother
Hmm.
and I learned of our story and of how we lost each other. And in that moment, I started identifying more as someone who was taken from my country, not
Hmm.
because to me, immigration indicates a level of choice to me.
Right.
And there was no choice in me coming to this country to the extreme, quite the opposite.
Right.
And so then I have had to unpack and navigate these other terms that are more closely related to my experience: kidnapping, child trafficking, these terms that carry so much weight that I myself don't know what term is right for me and how I came into this country. I still am trying to figure that out,
Right.
because I being identifying as a kidnappee or as a child who's trafficked, to me is so challenging because of the energy that puts into the family structure that I'm
Hmm.
attached to, that I love. I
Right.
love my parents. I love my brother. And these terms almost, it's not like peanut butter and jelly. They just don't go together,
Right. Exactly.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I mean, and we'll probably talk about this as your work with Adoption Mosaic. Maybe there's a component there, the both and that you often talk about with your work. And because, I imagine, and this is, I hear this from many transnational or intercountry adoptees, that you're neither one nor the other all the time. And it's so fluid that you're almost given the opportunity, if not the power, to pick what you want. Even then, it doesn't fully describe who you are and your identity, and it's always changing, which I
Totally.
would imagine can be difficult for many people, especially transnational adoptees who've lost the culture, lost the language, lost biological relatives, all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. Um, how did you meet? What did you learn actually when you met your biological mother in Colombia?
Yeah. So in 12 years ago, almost 12 years ago, my daughter and former husbands, we traveled to Colombia raising our daughter, I had said to my then husband that I wanted to raise my child with all the things. I mean, this is every parent, right? I wanted to raise my kid with all the things I didn't have,
Hmm.
which was uh, growing up with an understanding of what it meant to be Colombiana, an understanding of language, Spanish. I had lost that.
Hmm.
So of course I sent my daughter to Spanish immersion. We're really fortunate here in Portland. We have public schools that have language immersion schools, so we didn't have to send her to a private school. It was just part of the um, Portland public schools. Certain schools had language immersions, and so Maya got into one of the Spanish ones. My ex husband is Italian, so we only spoke Italian in the home for the first 5 years, and then it made sense for her to go to the Spanish immersion because grammatically and
Right.
structurally the language are super similar. So we would go to Italy to visit Paolo's family every other year, and then every other year I said I want to go to Colombia with our our child, uh and I kind of need to figure this out myself as far as what it means to be Colombian and fall in love with my own country. And so fast forward to when Maya was about 8 years old, she had been several times. We always went to the beach, and she said, "Hey, I know we're going to Colombia. I really want to see where Mama was born." And I had been there when I was 18, Bucaramanga. I said, "Sweetie, it's in the mountains. We don't get to play on the beach. Let's just go to the beach." And she said, "No, no, 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 no. I really want to see where you were born." And I said,
See, can I interrupt real quick because I think that's unusual with kids of adoptees. I've never had that experience where, and I'm slightly complaining, where a kid say, "Well, I want to see where you were born. Or I want to see the maternity home that you were in for a few days." But you got that from your daughter, which I think was fantastic.
yeah. And I think that this is a really, I could do a whole conversation just about that, Greg, because Maya's sibling, I don't know if this is sad or traumatizing or what, but Maya's sibling is adoption mosaic.
Right. As yeah, my work is probably a sibling of my
Yeah.
my two kids as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Maya, we were going to consider having more children. And then I started adoption mosaic when she was 3, which at three
Ah,
years old was when we were going to start trying to have another child.
okay. No, no, you're talking literally adoption mosaic is your other child. Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, it was, instead of having a child, and it wasn't conscious like, oh, I'm going to start adoption mosaic and not have another child. It was, I'm going to start mosaic adoption mosaic. And oh, that's right. A couple years ago we had said that when Maya was 3 we were going to have another kid. I'm good. How about you? Yeah, yeah, I'm good. All right, awesome. We've got Maya, and I'm going to plug away at this thing, adoption mosaic.
Right.
So that being said, Maya grew up in adoption mosaic, and you may have heard this story over the years that we've known each other. Is when Maya was about 3 years old, she was in the kitchen. And I was already, before I started Adoption Mosaic, I was working at the Oregon Post Adoption Resource Center, and I had
Hmm.
been doing quite a bit of work already in adoptions. My life was dripping with adoption.
Hmm.
And Maya, at 3 years old in the kitchen, says to me, "Mama, do I have a birth mom?" And I remember looking at her going, "What have I done?
Oh my
What have
God.
I done?"
Right.
And I just looked at her with this huge smile because she knew that a 3-year-old who knows that language, who is not an adoptee. I mean,
Right.
just the power of that.
Right.
Right? She was so involved in this work, and I brought her into this work in my own ways, that she had the language at 3. Do I have a birth mother?
Right.
And I said with a big smile, on her face. There was a part of me that was so proud also. And I said, yes, you do. And she said, her eyes got really big, huge smile. She got so excited. And she said, well, where is she? And I'm like, baby girl, I'm standing right here. And her face went from joy to sorrow in a split second.
She wanted she thought was special about being adopted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she was like, and her face just went so sad. And she's like, oh, well, that sucks. I mean, like in her own 3-year-old world way,
Right.
and language. Uh, and then we had a conversation. We sat down and I realized she understands the mechanics of it, but she doesn't understand or she didn't even understand the mechanics of it, but she understood the words, right?
Right.
But she didn't understand what the words meant.
Right.
And so she said, I just really wish I was adopted. And I said, well, to be adopted would mean you and I wouldn't be able to be together. So then she went to bed and she was like, oh, okay, well, then never mind. And then I want to say, like a month later, she came back and she said, I have a plan on how I could be adopted.
Mm-hmm.
This was like a month later. That to me meant she was seeping
Oh
on
yeah.
this. She was making some plans,
That
right?
dripping adoption got into her head. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it absolutely did. And she says, I have a plan. You take me to an orphanage because I was taken to an orphanage,
Uh-huh.
right? And we don't have orphanages here, but she didn't know that. So she said, you take me to an orphanage, you run home, put a wig on, put another outfit on, and come back to the orphanage and adopt me.
Wow. That's like a performance art piece. Yeah. Yeah. Like a deep one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And once again, these stories that are really somewhat comical
Mm-hmm.
are like seeped in this sadness
Right.
of, whoa, wow, okay. So here's the problem with that plan that you've got. What would happen if somebody, like in me driving home before I got home, what would happen if somebody else came along
Right.
and adopted you? And her eyes got really sad. And I think she was just like, ah, damn it. Okay, I'll go back to the drawing board.
You go out one room and come back and then from a different entrance, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe this will work,
Right.
right? And in that moment, I both of those experiences,
Yeah.
just made me realize that I, I have a lot of work to do around bringing her into this journey with me. And she's clearly interested. And most children do look at their parents and we're mirroring something for
Mm-hmm.
them. And they want to be like us until a certain age, and they want to have nothing to do with us, right? But in that window of her wanting to be just like me, I was also had started up youth activity groups for adoptees only.
Right.
And it was a very strict policy that only adult adoptees were in the room. And I was a mom of a 4, 3, 5, 7-year-old when I was
Mm-hmm.
creating this. And I had my creative hat on how to create curriculum for children around that age. And I created curriculum that, of course, would be fun to Maya as well.
Right.
And she was really sad to not be able to be a part of those groups.
If we could go back to what you learned by meeting your biological mother, what you learned about your own birth, your alleged relinquishment, or however that occurred, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's right. We can take so many different branches and just go off.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is, yeah. So okay, so going back to my daughter, she really wanted, I think that we started this because you
We
had
did.
said,
Yeah.
oh, this, yeah, who has a kid who says, I want to see where you were born, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Maya said, I want to go and see where you were born. We ended up going to Bucaramanga as a result. And I grabbed a black and white photo of me and my sister in our old passport, original Colombian passport pictures. I had copies of those, and I grabbed them. So we were the same age that when we left in those pictures at 4.5 and 6 years old. We kind of made our trip into this. We explored Bucaramanga through searching and going to the different offices like Vital Records, for
Hmm.
example, and just thought, well, maybe we'll see if we can find something. And the third to last day, we had gone to a newspaper and had asked to take a classified ad out in the newspaper, uh, and because I was looking for our mother. And the woman at the newspaper saw the pictures and she said, hold on a second, went to the back room, talked to her boss, and her boss said, no, 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 we'll do a full article. And they wrote an article, put the two pictures in, they interviewed me, and then it went to print. This was right around Christmas. It went to print 2 days after Christmas. And within a couple of hours of it going to print, four women called the number below and
Hmm.
said, those are my girls. And or I have some information about those girls.
Right.
And one of the women said, I remember the day that the girls were taken. I was there. And I believe it was the woman who was the daughter of the woman who ended up taking us.
Hmm.
And so the story that was told to us was that our mother had left. We had been living on the streets with our mom. Somebody had given her some money to get off the streets and find an apartment. She found a room in a house. We stayed in that house, in that room. Our mom found a job in a town that was about 10 hours on a bus ride. She asked the woman who was taking care, or who owned the house, I guess, if she was an older woman, if she would take care of us, which was very common, is very common in developing countries.
Hmm.
Of, okay, my kids are stable. Can you hold down the fort here while I go set up shop over there, and then I'm going to send for my kids.
Right.
Uh, and this woman, within 3 days of our mom getting on a bus to go to her new job and figure things out there, this woman had taken us to the orphanage and sold us in the black market
Right.
of adoption.
Right.
The the speed in which this happened, of us going from Bucaramanga to another orphanage in Bogota, transferring, which was another 10-hour bus ride, transferring to that orphanage and then being adopted to the United States. So late October, and October 20th is when we were taken to the first orphanage. And then by Thanksgiving, my dad said he remembers being told there's two girls that are available for adoption. And by February, we were in the United States
Wow.
adopted.
Was there a Colombian agency involved? I know of Fauna, but wondering if that was the one that was involved.
Yeah,
It was
Fauna was
Fauna.
the orphanage.
Yeah.
Fauna was the orphanage. The first orphanage in Bucaramanga wasn't sending kids doing inter country adoption.
Right.
And we had to be sent to Fauna to be able to be adopted out of the country uh to to a family.
I
And
imagine
so
along that process, your history is being scrubbed, basically.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So our birth certificates had our said that we were born in Bucaramanga.
Hmm.
We were born in Bogota. I still very much identify as being born in Bucaramanga
Hmm.
because I that's what the narrative, it's what's on my birth certificate. It's what feels right. Plus, it's really fun to say I was born in Bucaramanga because it
Hmm.
took me a lot of years to figure out how to pronounce that
It
correctly.
sounds really, really, oh, a neat pronunciation. Yeah.
Well, and I spent
I'm
some
not gonna
really
try. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, And I spent some really formative years there. That's where I spent the majority of from my understanding, from the story that has been told to me. I was spent most of my years there, living with our mother, who was, running from our father, who was extremely abusive. And she had taken us from our father. And at that time, in the 70s, in the mid 70s, even if you were being abused by your husband, there wasn't shelters, women's shelters, and there weren't places for women to go. The place you went was back home to your abusive husband.
Right.
That was what you were expected to do. And one of the reasons that she couldn't go to the authorities in Bucaramanga was because she knew, or thought, or was worried, afraid that she would be sent back to her husband, because in a sense she had taken us, right in her own form. And so everything was scrubbed. Exactly. Our birth certificates say that I am 13 months, a year and 1 month younger than I actually am. It says my sister is 18 months younger than she actually is. So my parents on paper were told they were adopting a 3 and a 4-year-old, but they were adopting a 4.5 and a 6-year-old.
Right, which is very common all over the world for U.S. Intercountry adoptees.
Yeah. Right.
So has that been corrected, or is it still that's what you have on your record?
Well, a dear friend and an attorney told me once, aka you, that it.
I hope it was good advice.
I don't know. You're about to tell me. Tell me if this guy was full of it or not. Right. Told me that it would be a really hard process to do, and depending on the country that I was adopted from. And so I have been in a meeting with the Colombian consulate for Adoption Mosaic, and for some work that we're doing in collaboration with, trying to help to make some changes on a kind of a global international level on Colombia. And the Colombian consulate said, we can get you your original birth certificate. Just know that very likely might jeopardize your standing of being a U.S. citizen. So be prepared to never come back to I mean, I'm laughing, right? Be prepared to never come back to the United States. My daughter was on this Zoom call, while we were listening to that. And I was beyond my screen looking at my daughter as this news was being broadcasted in my living room, with just me and my daughter sitting there. And she was 18 at the time. And I looked up at her, and she just started bawling and crying. And I just, So long story short, I'm not at this point in my life willing to jeopardize that. And I am working with a group that you are also involved in to see if I can be a part of a change that will allow all of us adoptees. Because if that is the case, the majority of us have falsified papers that come into this country. How can that be the case? So what I was told was, you were basically outing yourself that you came into this country with false allegations of who you actually are. And the ridiculousness. I'm like, do people remember that I was 4, 4.5? And I'm sorry, this was a system that created this. All I want to do is go buy some property and boost the economy in Colombia, and live on the coast and somewhere in Santa Marta or Cartagena, and learn my language again, and be with my mom in her elderly years, and be a support. But I'm going to have to jeopardize my life here. That is that both and. That is that I do not exist equally and fairly with the rights that anyone in Colombia has, or anyone in the United States has.
Right. I agree. And I think I did give you solid advice then.
Okay, good.
It's,
Okay,
it's
good.
hard. I think it'd be easier to change it in the US than it would be. Obviously, you don't need to change it in Bogota or Colombia, but you could probably get it changed in the US to match what is in Colombia. But again, it's not a easy process to do.
Mm,
I certainly have clients that have same issue, and basically you have to. And usually, what happened, not in your case, but in other cases, in one case it was a dentist, but some doctor testifies that this person is actually younger than um, who they are, and there's really often never any evidence of that. It's just a doctor that they find that will testify to the court in the adoption in the U.S., and that's how they change their ages, which creates all sorts of different problems later, as you've found out.
yeah. Well, we came with the false
Right.
ages.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So those false ages were given to us where we were born, at the location of where we were born, and our ages, and um, yeah. Interestingly, our mother's name was not falsified,
Interesting.
but
Did you
everything
have a name on your birth record?
for our mother.
No, for you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And my name was not changed.
Right. Wait,
Yeah.
were you born? You weren't born Ostrich though.
Yeah, I was.
Because
Astrid.
yeah, yesterday or the day before, I think I had a text from you and it appeared on Apple Play CarPlay. And my son, I just picked him up from school and he looked at it and said, Astrid Castro, that's a cool name. Yeah. And I agree. It is. It's such a cool name.
I
Yeah.
love that.
What
Well,
does your name mean? What does your name mean to you? I mean, I don't know where Castro came from, whether that was a prior marriage or
yeah.
um
So like so many of us, I've had a lot of names.
hmm
I started off in this world as Astrid Castro with no middle name,
hmm
and my parents adopted us, and I became my Astrid Julia Castro,
hmm
when it took about 5 years for us to become citizens of the United States back then.
Hmm.
Like we were here, but I was, well, no, I was 7. So I guess that's three years. Well, 3 or 4 years. And I was holding up my naturalization papers, and when we went to court, and it was funny because my mom and dad, we didn't have middle names on our paperwork, so they said, when you guys are going to become citizens in the future, and when you become citizens, we can put in middle names. Do you have a middle name you would like? And they were thinking, we're going to let you have a middle name that is easier to say in English. Astrid was not an easy name for people to
Right.
say. People had never heard of it. Now it's a little bit more, but my sister and I were, newly English speakers, newly to this country. We thought that was super cool that we were going to be able to pick our own middle names. So I asked to be called Bubbles, and my sister asked to be called Cookie Monster.
Oh, I hope they did. Do they agree? No.
No, I think both of them were like, "Oh my God, what did we just
Of
say?"
course
Yeah.
you're gonna say that, you know? I
I
get any
mean,
name in the world.
any name,
Right.
any name. So when I started my youth activity group, we
Uh-huh.
would start off by introducing ourselves, and I would say to the kids, "You get to pick any name you want for this group because we're going to have a conversation about names and what
Right.
names mean."
But you
And
can't pick Bubbles because I'm already
because
Bubbles.
I would have, because Austria was hard to say, so
Uh-huh.
I would tell them my bubbles story, and it was a way. And so I have kids running around Portland or Oregon. They're grown now, so
Right.
maybe it's different places in the world who call me Bubbles.
I'm I'm
And
I'm thinking
so
I need to call you Bubbles from now on,
yeah,
actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so, well, okay, because now my name is Astrid Castro. So I was Astrid Julia Castro Reynolds, because my parents then gave us a list after I chose Bubbles, and they were like, "Yeah, no, we can't
No.
do that.
Here's
Here's a
the approved
regular,
list. Yeah.
here's an approved list."
Right.
Totally,
Right.
totally. And so I just like randomly picked Julia.
Yeah.
I never liked it. And so as soon as and then so I was Astrid Julia Castro. They did keep Castro because it was on our paperwork.
Which is
Um,
unusual.
it is unusual
Yeah.
that they kept that. And And then Reynolds, which was our parents' last name. And then I went from that to I got rid of Julia and got rid of Castro because I didn't know if Castro was actually, I had been told the likelihood of that being your last name is slim to none. It's like Smith. So I had been told that my whole life. So it's like, as soon as I get a chance, I'm getting rid of Castro. And I never liked Julia. So then I took my ex-husband's name, who was Dabbini. So it was Astrid Dabbini, which felt like it rang. It was good. Right. And then when I got a divorce, I had already found Carmenza. And so I then chose to go back to my birth last name.
So now you're Astrid Castro.
Astrid Castro. Yeah. And so if I had been Bubbles, my initials would be ABC. I'm down.
You could still do it. It's kind of a hassle to change your name, but yeah.
Well, I mean, it's actually not that. I mean, in the big scheme of things, I feel like it's not that. I mean, it's easy when you're getting married or divorced.
You get a free name change, yeah.
You get a free name change, yeah. But I am actually seriously, so your listeners will be able to understand or know the story behind the B. But I'm actually considering my daughter wants to change her name, and we followed suit and didn't give her a middle name when she was born because I said, I want you to be able to pick your own middle name when you are ready and you get to choose that. She has picked her
any name or an approved list of names.
No, any name. This is where, and when she was 5 years old and went to kindergarten, 5-6 years old, her name is Maya, and she the kids were like kind of trying to tease her and calling Maya Papaya, Maya Papaya. Yeah. And so she came home and she said, Mama, do I have a middle name? And I said, no, we didn't give you a middle name because, and then I told her she could pick her own middle name whenever she was ready. And she said, well, I'm ready. Okay, great. What do you want your middle name to be? And she just grabbed that teasing and owned it. And she said, I want Papaya. I think that's a cute name, middle name.
That's so ownership. That's just like, okay, folks. Yeah, that's me.
That's you. And she is almost 21 in January, and she wants to go and say, I have a tattoo that says Maya Papaya right here on my arm.
That's awesome.
And so she has held on to Papaya. She loves the story. She loves everything that it means to her. And so her middle name has always been Papaya, Maya Papaya.
Informally, she may
informally, and she is, and she wants to legally.
What would you legally change yours to?
Astrid B. Castro.
Just B.
Yeah.
Just an initial.
And then only people in my inner circle
will know. Yeah.
Will know the story.
Unless this podcast goes viral.
Yeah. Unless this podcast it might. You never know.
Right. I feel like we haven't finished up with your mother, but I wanted to ask a question. I keep imagining you and your sister running into the corner and communicating with each other sort of freely. And I'm wondering if you still communicate with her about these issues, or if there's a difference in how you each have approached, or if there's any backstory there that, you want to reveal or talk about.
Yeah, we couldn't be any more different when it comes to our needs around adoption. She was older, she was 6, and she has memories that I don't. And that's kind of where I leave it with my sister, out of respect for who she is and her privacy. She's a pretty private person. And very few people know my sister's version of her story. And that is on purpose. Right. I'm even with my mom's story, it's really hard to tell my story without exposing and telling her story, or my adopted parents. Very few people know my brother's story.
In fact, I just didn't remember ever hearing that you had a brother. Yeah. I'm sure you've said it before. I just don't remember it.
Yeah. 3 months. And I don't think I even said it here. 3 months after my mom and dad adopted me and my sister, Mom was pregnant with our little brother, Tony.
Again, not uncommon, which is always bizarre.
So here's an interesting thing that I have a theory behind. I read a study that actually only happens 3% of the time. I would love for somebody to actually do some research behind as far as experiencing pregnancy and having a live birth after adopting, right?
Right.
That we hear you and whenever I'm presenting this and at a conference or in a workshop, I say, well, then that must mean I know all 3%
Right.
because
Right.
right?
I know
Because
quite a
I
few
feel
myself. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And people say to me all the time, what? That's crazy. I feel like I hear it all the time. Uh, and here's a wiki strid. This is Wikipedia according to Astrid. There's
Mm-hmm.
no research. It's anecdotal. I made
Mm-hmm.
this up. I don't know if it's true, but my theory, this is a wiki strid theory, is that because there's so much excitement and joy, this couple has tried for how long to experience pregnancy?
Mm-hmm.
The entire reason that they decided to adopt was because of infertility. And that leads them to talking about it at a much higher rate than those who don't end up experiencing it.
Right.
And so therefore it gets skewed in our thinking of how often it happens, but that it doesn't actually happen that often.
I can see that.
That's my theory.
Yeah. I'm not sure. We'll apply for some research funds and see what we can
Yes.
do. Yeah.
Yes. We
Yet
could
another
join
thing
the
we need to
yeah.
research. Yeah.
Just another. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's so much.
Just try to close out your Colombian experience, which is ongoing, obviously, but has citizenship and whether it's dual citizenship been an issue for you that you're interested in? And is that
Absolutely.
possible with Colombia?
Uh, so my understanding is the U.S. doesn't recognize any dual citizenship, but you can have a citizenship with another country, but then you always are carrying your U.S. passport and you have to come in and out of this country with your U.S. passport if you are a U.S. citizen. That's my understanding.
Right.
My daughter is very interested in she has her Italian citizenship. She would very much like to have her Colombian citizenship. And so she's kind of TikTok waiting for me and for me to get mine. And because of what I was told about the process and how it could jeopardize my U.S. citizenship, I have not sought that out. I would like to. I absolutely would like to, like I said earlier, I'd like to own some property and I'd like to live there 6 months out of the year. I mean, 90% of my work is online and I can
Right.
do this work anywhere. And so I would love to really relearn Spanish and live there. But my understanding is that would jeopardize. And if somebody along the line said, you know what, it's not, we're okay.
I
I
don't think it
got you
would. I mean, I can say as a lawyer, I don't think it would jeopardize your citizenship of the U.S. at all. Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. The USCIS policy now it's policy, not law, is that and so I use this as an example. If an adoption is disrupted for any reason or dissolved, if you've already become a citizen, it doesn't impact your U.S. citizen status. So it'd be essentially kind of the same concept that one, you didn't commit any fraud, and two, you've already obtained U.S. citizenship, so it wouldn't impact that. Now, that said, the administration in power is often the controlling factor. And if, we have another Trump administration, everything's up in the air. So I think it is good to worry about it. I would say that if I were able to make something happen in 6 months with the USCIS, go for it. But nothing happens with the USCIS in 6 months, meaning
Oh,
that you're not going to impact your citizenship by pursuing it in a different country. Your U.S. citizenship, it's secure. Yeah.
okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, then, yes, I know lots of Colombian adoptees who have gotten their Colombian citizenship.
Right.
And I would very much like
Yeah.
to do that.
And the obvious caveat is the administration. When you have people saying, I'm going to round up 10 million people as soon as I'm in office and put them in camps in the middle of the U.S., That's absolutely crazy. But
Yeah.
not unprecedented, but it's absolutely crazy.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's heavy thinking,
Yeah.
This has been part 1 of my interview with Astrid Castro. If you subscribe or follow What Next, simply hang on and the second part should pop up right away. If you want to take a break and come back, which I understand, I'm a podcast listener too, part 2 is already out and available for download. I hope you come back because the second part of the interview is about creating content for adopted people and delivering programs and events that help people understand the complexities of adoption and the people who live it. What Next is written and hosted by me, Gregory Luce, and is a production of Adoptees United, Inc., a national nonprofit charitable organization dedicated to equality for all adopted people. Please follow, subscribe, and rate us wherever you get your podcasts, and sign up for the newsletter at adopteesunited.org/whatnext. And consider supporting us with a tax-deductible donation at adopteesunited.org/donate. Anything you provide helps us keep the lights on. See you next time.